Hey everybody, and welcome finally to another Coalition Revisited. Um, Maybe you expected yet another match versus Balanced, but truth be told, at the point of this recording, I'm actually out of gameplay videos versus Balanced. So be sad, or which most of you maybe are, rejoice or be happy. Anyways, let's get into it. Dutch German Coalition. As you may know, I've been playing it quite a lot recently. Again, I think I played a good amount of it last year or so as well. And then after a while, I got sick of it. Yeah, before I get into the units themselves, Dutch German Coalition is kind of like most of the units are relatively specialized. They don't really have a lot of sort of multi-role units, I guess you could say. Mostly when it comes to AA and tanks. I kind of touched upon that on the stream as well, I believe. But let's get a bit more into detail here. So first of all, logistics. Nothing really out of the ordinary. Don't use the supply truck because it's slow. It may be armored, but who cares about armored and amphibious if it's slow as fuck. Infantry CV, which is kind of nice, has the YPR as a transport, which sure you sacrifice speed, but if you take a Jeep CV as a second CV, or maybe a second infantry CV, maybe in a Dornier or in a Fuchs, then this is very nice to have because you automatically get a bit of base defense. More onto that IFV a bit later, but that's a very nice combination. You also get a Lynx, which is unfortunately without rocket pods, but it's fast, small, into 6 HP, which is nice. Yeah, Leopard 1 CV is okay for 1 versus 1s because it's relatively cheap while having okay armor. Leopard 2 if you want something heavier. Other than that, that is your typical default sort of logistic units. Unfortunately, this doesn't have 2 top armor, otherwise this would be a pretty good choice as well. Yeah. Infantry. One of the strengths of the deck, although the deck doesn't really excel in anything, it is just either... I feel like most of the tabs are either awkward or just pretty good, but they're not like terrible or ridiculously good. They're just... nothing is really bad, but it just can be awkward or unflexible. Which is why, especially in a 1 versus 1, you often cannot really go for more than 3 slots in logistics tabs, or you sacrifice your 5th plane tab, because in some tabs you have to choose more units that you would have to in other decks. But again, I'll go deeper into that later on. When it comes to the German infantry, there's not really much worth taking, most notably the Milan 2 and Panzergrenz 94 the Marder 2. Other than that, you maybe want to take Fliegerfaust 2 because you don't really have any non-radar AA in your support tab other than the Eotshawk and the Stingers on the Gepard A2. But of course, you do sacrifice one of your valuable infantry slots. That being said, Mechanized is a decent choice for this deck, so maybe you want to try that out. In which scenario I would probably take both Fliegerfaust 2 and if you take one, maybe even go for the base stinger in the 5-pointer because it's 20 points, ridiculously cheap. The 20% less accuracy is really not a big deal in my opinion, because you just want to spam them around really. So, but of course, Fliegerfaust is also just very, very good. Just don't bother with the base Fliegerfaust. Then there's obviously Fallschirmjäger 90, which I wouldn't take over Corps Mariniers. You do have a much better primary weapon and a much better anti-tank weapon, but Corps Mariniers for one have a better MG, which isn't a huge deal, but they also still have a very, very good primary weapon, so it's not like they lose a ton of DPS, and they gain a tiny bit of DPS due to being 15 men, although that is mostly negligible. But having 15 men in this scenario is actually worth the trade-off in my opinion. Because elite squads you want to keep alive and repair after a fight due to them being so expensive. And elite squads, they take just as much damage from fire support as regular squads, as reservists. So that is why taking and using a lot of special forces can be very, very dangerous and kind of risky. So that's you really have to micro them a lot, because one Corps Marines 90 squad or one Fallschirmjäger 90 squad will lose to 2 regular infantry squads if they have to fight at the same time. Or maybe not versus 2, but at least versus 3, or versus 2 plus their transport maybe. But if they were to fight one after the other, meaning one regular infantry squad and after that once that squad is dead, the next one, you could go on and kill 6 or 7 regular squads after the other. But they will always take a bit of damage, and if there's transports around or light vehicles in the forests, they will always take 1, 2, sometimes 3 damage before killing it, unless you are very, very good at microing or the enemy vehicle is panicked. So that is why the HP, when it comes to these kind of expensive squads, is certainly worth the trade-off of having less, a bit less DPS. The DPS is still significantly higher than anything that a shock or regular infantry squad can field, which is what you mostly will fight against in forests. So, and a 19 AP is also is enough for dealing with light fire support or IFVs in forests as well, which is where you will mostly use them, of course, or town fights for CQC. What I usually do in my unspec is that this is in my infantry tab my only really motorized fighting infantry, because everything else is tracked due to having very good tracked transports. But I would definitely go for Corps Marines 95 over the Fallschirmjäger 90. Especially since for a good anti-tank weaponry you can still take the Panzergrenz 90, which I would mostly take in the Marder 2, because every other transport is not particularly great. If you just want it for the Panzerfaust, then obviously you can just take them in the 5-pointer, but I feel that usually just having 84s around everywhere and coupled in with the Panzergrenz 90 squad here and there is usually enough. Or when it comes to the Dutch infantry, grenadiers are very, very good. They have top-notch 5-point transport. So if you want spam infantry, that's a very good choice. Unfortunately, they don't have 16 AP, but they do have a battle rifle, which is better than an assault rifle, which is what most other 10-point spam infantry has. So that is nice. Compared to the M113, you have your 5 kilometers power slower, and have 5 less side and 1 less side armor, but the base riflemen have assault rifle, which is, like I said, worse than a battle rifle, the FAL. You can also spam them with the YPR 765, which is basically a worse KAFV 25 because it has 5% less accuracy, and it might have less ammunition. No, it does not, but it's basically the same thing with 5% less accuracy. Other than that, it is, as you see, identical. Even though it is objectively worse, it is still a good choice. If you are that kind of player who wants to spam cheap infantry with IFVs, helicopter obviously not worth it, and spamming them in wheel transport is honestly also not really worth it. Although the wheel transport is pretty okay. It has 2 front armor and heavy MG, although it does not have a lot of autonomy, which can sometimes, in very rare scenarios, actually be a bit annoying. Most of the time it isn't. What's it called? The reservists are actually pretty good. Firestarter. Firestarter in a, again, very good 5-point transport battle rifle, although the damage output is basically negligible. It is, if you want to spam reservists, also pretty good choice. Genies, not really worth taking in my opinion. They don't even get the AMX 13, so that's twice as bad. Base Corps Marines, there's no reason to take them over the 95 version. Stingers talked about. Stottruppen, no reason to take them when you have Stottruppen 95, which are, they are worse against infantry than Commandos 90, but still very good for 20 points. Though they have a slightly better or side grade of an anti-tank weapon. You lose 10% accuracy, but you gain 1 AP and 10 RPM. On max range, they can be a bit unreliable, but in forests, they're perfectly fine. Personally, I like to spam them with the AMX PR1, which is the AMX 13 VTT, in case you get confused why I said AMX 13, potentially. I wouldn't really take them in the YPR, because while the YPR is decent, it isn't really that great to pay based. It isn't really good enough to pay 35 points for if you buy it with the infantry. I feel like that it isn't really it's usually not, it's not really a bad idea, but personally I like to spam them because they have only 2 front armor. They don't have the best autocannon to deal with other vehicles unless it's another very light IFV. And for 35 points, it, in my opinion, isn't the best combination you can get. So I prefer to spam them in, quote unquote, spam them in the 5-point transport. Isn't a bad choice, but if you want to take the YPR, I would take them with Grenadiers, because then you can spam them, and as if practically every unit there, of course, a lot better when spammed or when do you have more of them. But if you have them in a 35 points package, you have one here and one there. You don't really have a lot of them on the field, and on their own, they are a lot less effective. Again, this goes for basically every unit in the game, of course, but with these cheap kind of units, this goes even more so. They get a significantly, they become significantly more dangerous with each additional unit. I guess you could say it's an exponential growth. I think, whatever. Anyways, then you have these, which are basically worthless. Don't even bother with them. They're also a bit bugged, I think. Support. This is one of these very, very, very awkward tabs. You have some very good units. The Roland 3 is good. The Roland 2 is honestly also pretty good. But that's mostly not really a big reason to take them when you have the Roland 3. But even if you only had the Roland 2 as a choice, it's not really bad. It doesn't have a lot of range, but it's pretty cheap for 65% accuracy. You have the Gepard line, which is also pretty alright. Recently, as you might have seen, I've really grown onto the Gepard A2. I think I honestly really underestimated the 20% accuracy bonus over the base Gepard. You could probably also choose the Gepard A1, which is nearly the same accuracy, although for 10 points you do get stingers, which can be situationally be pretty nice. Yeah. Roland 3 on wheels if you want, which is arguably a must, since it's the only wheeled AA, unless you want to take stingers in the wheeled transport. Like I said, this is pretty awkward because you don't have anything like a Crotal, like a Wolverine, like a Chaparral, like a Strela 10. You have nothing of these sorts, which can be very, very annoying. Because of course, you know, in a 1v1, for example, you might not see a lot of seed, but you will most likely try to micro your AA, and potentially a seed can shut down your whole AA net. So you'll always have to be wary. And if your opponent is someone who uses a lot of seed, potentially you can really be fucked if you're not particularly great at microing, or if your ASFs are reloading and you don't have any points for that or anything along those lines. You also don't really have anything cheap. The cheapest thing you get is the Gepard, which is pretty good for 45 points, but sometimes you just want something that you can spam more, which is more effective against potential helicopter spams, because then the enemy has more targets to shoot at, etc. And again, it has radar, which doesn't always matter, but you know, if you have it on a flank and you're busy microing your radar array on the front line and the enemy sends out a seed, and you say, well, I turned off my radar array, but you completely forget about the Gepard in your base or on your flank or something, and your opponent still has a seed up and just says, oh, well, another AA picked off, and then suddenly your flank or your base is without AA. It's just, it doesn't matter all the time. Sometimes it doesn't really matter in a match at all, but sometimes it does, and that can be very, very frustrating, as you might have seen in some matches of me. So that's why something that costs 35 points, like a VDAA, like the BTR 152 TCM of Israel, something like a Strela 10 even if it costs the same, something without radar would go such a long way, you know? I've said it before, and others pretty sure also said it. Something like making one of the Dutch Gepards, or maybe one of the German Gepards even, make it 30-35 points, massively reduce the airplane range, reduce the accuracy to 30-35%, maybe reduce the helicopter range by 1 step, maybe don't, whatever, and make a non-radar. And that would fit so well. It would still fit the whole mechanized, you don't really have any fast A kind of playstyle, but it would fill a huge gap without like suddenly making the deck OP without any weakness. It still has enough weaknesses, and it's still not top tier in anything, you know? It's one of these things, but enough about AA. personally not a fan of the Hawks. Before I forget talking about them, you could use that. It's kind of nice to not have to micro it, and in bigger games, the kind of being pretty expensive for not being very accurate is not as big of a deal. Artillery, nothing really noteworthy. I'm pretty sure the M109 is basically a Paladin clone, or is slightly better, but still bad. You could spam M110s if you want. The lance it's okay. I don't think it is particularly good in a 1 versus 1 because it doesn't have the same stun AoE effect like an LRM or Uragan. It is somewhat easy to avoid, and many maps offer way too much cover to reliably have an effect with that. Of course, you could use it for CV sniping, but again, I don't think it is that great. But I think in a team game, it's gonna be alright. Mortars, you have, of course, the HS30. You could also run this. Very, very good for fire support because it has a very short aim time. And can be very, very annoying for your opponent, or 3HE mortar if you prefer that. Does have only 100 rounds though, and the much better British mortar has 160, which, trust me, is very noticeable. Alright, I hope I'm not talking too much, talking too fast, because when I talk too fast, nobody can understand what I'm saying. Thanks. MX13, very, very nice fire support. Let me repeat that. Very, very nice fire support. Kind of what I'd like to see in Eurocore, although that would probably be too strong considering that the MX10 massively boosts the power level. Basically, sort of that thing versus Infantry. Very, very good, but of course, the massive boost is you gain a lot more per card. You gain, I believe, 22 in the Dutch-German deck, which is just a very, very good fire support card. Card efficient, good against IVs. It is honestly nearly a must-have, at least in 1 versus 1 deck. It is a very, very good unit. Kind of makes the Kyler obsolete, especially since for forest fights you have good enough infantry, so the Kyler is not really needed. 2F5 is just it is a super heavy, and that's about it. Out of the super heavies, it's in my opinion the second worst, but being the only one that is in my opinion worse is the M1 mod, but being the worst super heavy isn't really a big deal because it's still super heavy. So it doesn't have an autoloader like the T90, it doesn't have a missile, it doesn't have very high speed, it doesn't have 12 or 10 RPM, it doesn't have an autocannon or something, but it's still 23 AP, 22 front armor, very good accuracy. So it is a super heavy, and that's about it. 2F4NL is basically a slightly bigger 2F4, which I would prefer in 1 versus 1s, in my opinion. Because if you have to deal with something like an M2 Wilk or something, against an autoloader you sometimes need an extra bit of firepower. And like the 2F4 has 1919, and in closer quarter, or not quite max range, it'll be basically just on par with an M2 Wilk, even though it's more expensive. So with autoloaded tanks, you sometimes need a bigger advantage than just a 10-15 point advantage. Which is why I think the 2F4NL is sometimes just needed. 2F4 is not really... The whole tank type, the whole Leopard 2 line can be summarized in okay but nothing special. Most of the time just being a bit outclassed by something. You know? It's just nothing really... I think the 2F4NL is maybe the one that stands out the most because it's in a quite good price... Also, why is this empty? This shouldn't be empty, right? I just noticed that these two, they're missing the optic here, aren't they? Jesus Christ, Eugen. Yeah, the whole Leopard 2 line for both nations is just okay, really. That's about it. The whole tank type is okay other than the AMX-13, which is very, very good. Everything else just okay or eh. Nothing really worth talking about, honestly. Recon tab, Leopard Vercanning is very nice. It isn't that great anymore because only 8 front armor, and if it gets spotted, it is easily getting killed by 1 or at least, or at maximum 2 shots in most scenarios, so you have to be careful. Don't try to engage, if the opponent is playing Finpal, don't try to engage the T55. in most ranges you will lose, because even at max range a T-55 will two-shot you, so be very, very careful. It is still very nice to have, and kind of fills the medium tank or tank for like one of your weaker zones where you just want some tank. The extra stealth obviously gives it a bit of survivability, but on the front line it is honestly not that useful most of the times. Since your opponent will have scouts, and once it's spotted, it's more or less dead. This is honestly also not a bad unit, but you mostly probably just can't fit it in. You most likely will need 2 cards of Recon Infantry, because the KCT have too low availability with only 4 per card, and the Husaren and the BGS, while card efficient, they can't really fight at all, and sometimes you just need a shock or elite infantry that can also fight if it came to it, or at least have the 10 HP. Looks is alright, but then you also have the discount Hachinana. Basically a Hachinana for 5 points less. However, you do have oh no, the Hachinana also has only 390 rounds. Never mind. Again, you have 5% less accuracy, you are a bit slower and have less autonomy. The autonomy in this case can be quite annoying for a Recon vehicle that you might want to drive around the map, and it suddenly is out of fuel. So in this scenario, it actually will matter every now and then, more often than not. It's still just very, very good Recon vehicle. It will lose to AMX Sense and stuff, but it will win against anything that isn't a KT or a BTR-88 or something. The 5% accuracy difference can be quite noticeable though. It is still pretty good though. Again, Tiger, I don't really, not again, but Tiger, I don't really need to talk about it. I think the stealth has such a massive, without the stealth it wouldn't be half as good. It's the jack of all trades, master of none, can be very annoying. You have to be careful though, because obviously something like a Lasso or something can easily kill it. It is only medium size, meaning it will land relatively fast. So unless you're hovering over water or over a forest, if you see a plane coming, if you spam land, then not spam, but if you click on land, it will most likely land before the plane will be in range for the missiles. Vehicles, right, I forgot to talk about another 2. Basically, king of IFVs in a way, will win against nearly every other IFV, other than like a BMP-3 or Bradley in missile range. Doesn't have the best anti-infantry DPS, but it is again very good against other IFVs. And unlike the this YPR, which lacks the punch a bit against vehicles with only 2 front armor, it's not particularly great against autocannons, and with only 2 AP and default range or average range, it is very good and very cost efficient. But if you have to fight against something like a CV90 or something along those lines, then you're just gonna die horribly. That's why the Mother 2 can sometimes be nice. Other than that, Weasel is okay for base defense. Jaguar 2 is, I tried it before, I haven't really tried it a lot yet, but I think it's, if you have that 1 point, personally I would probably put this in the vehicle tab, because it has medium optics. For on some maps, on some flanks, let's say on highway near the second spawn, between the 2 second spawn points, it's a good position for it. The medium optics allows it to kind of spot tanks if they're in cover, but firing 20 AP is basically enough for IFVs. It's not too expensive. 3 front armor means it will tank a couple of autocannon salvos very often. I think it's honestly not that bad. If you can fit it in, it may be nice, but it's nothing really huge. It's kind of like you most likely will have nothing else to fit it in, so I'd say if you have 1 point left and you can only put something in the vehicle tab, try out the Jaguar 2. I haven't myself, but I think it is honestly not that horrible. You could also instead try, of course, the wheeled Dutch version, but it does have medium optics and only 2 front armor. It's a bit cheaper though. Whatever floats your boat. I'd say honestly, maybe try them out. For 40 points, 20 AP, very good accuracy and good range, or sometimes just sideshot a heavy tank, maybe try them out. Helicopters, worthless. It's just a good anti-tank okay anti-tank helicopter. Not really, in my opinion, very useful in a 1 versus 1 scenario unless you're a very helicopter heavy player, like maybe someone like Putin, or if you're a healer rusher. It's yeah, it's basically like an Apache, but instead of, well, it is an Apache, but I mean like the American Apache in Wargame, but instead of the rocket pods, you get 8 more Hellfires. Yeah, in a 1 versus 1 and not really needed at all in my opinion if you have the Tiger. Oh, it's just an okay anti-helo or anti-air helicopter. I tried using this as my sort of mobile and non-radar AA for flanks and stuff, but while it is obviously can be nice, it doesn't exactly fit the same role, of course, and only substitutes that role to a certain extent, or fits that role to a certain extent. Yeah, if you have the space, it's not really a bad unit, but not necessarily needed in my eyes. It isn't really quite as good as something like the Israeli Cobra, for example, which is very good for 70 points, still pretty good as a multi-role, or the Deb, with the medium optics. It also only has 4 HP, so it dies quickly to planes. If you want an anti-tank helicopter but the TD is too expensive, this bow is probably your best choice. It is alright, honestly. It is not very fast and has only 4 HP, but it packs quite a punch. It's not Fennec Tattoo levels, but it's still okay. Not really useful because you have the Escort, very good helicopter. One of the few top-notch units, like top-tier units that the deck has. Yeah, it's good for flanks, good for assaults, even good for base defense and stuff like that. It is a bit expensive for sometimes, but it can do a lot of work. So that's top-tier unit. And then let's lastly go on to planes. Useless, a must-have in my eyes, because Tiger is too expensive sometimes to just open with, and having no access to like cheap AA really. This is your ticket for killing single helicopters that might sneak around or something. More or less a must-have. I think you get 3 on veteran or elite. But yeah. You could also take the block, but it does the same thing for 30 points more, and the extra speed means that it won't really effectively use the gun, or potentially will only use 1 missile against a helicopter, and paying for 2 extra missiles isn't really worth it. The accuracy and range on the gun also is not, especially since you mostly use it against helicopters, in which scenario it is the same, and you also get less per card, so there's no real reason to take the F1, this one. MLU, it's the same ASF as the Americans have, but there's no reason to take it when you have the KWS, because you get 2 as well on a higher veterancy, and having 1 less long range missile isn't really a big deal, because the extra veterancy means you are significantly more accurate. Yeah, KWS, I said it before, probably the best ASF in the game when it comes to the per card and veterancy and stuff. Yeah. Basically a worse IDS. For the same price, it is less survivable. It does have a better turn radius. Not a huge deal though. Other than that, if you want that bomber, take the IDS, but both are not particularly great. Cluster bomber with only 4 bombs. It does have 8 AP, but again, it's also not very survivable, so yeah. OCU, basically a cheaper MLU. Danish MLU, but you get 2 long-range missiles instead of 4. Same veterancy, I believe. Pretty good, especially if you already have it and you have an ASF. Send that in behind your ASF for some additional missiles. I would never really go for it. Only with that plane against an enemy plane, unless it's a plane that isn't very good against other planes. But never go for like a PU or something, or after a PU or something with that. Of course, it should be obvious. Not really needed with the F-104. Peace Rhine. Yeah, it's the Peace Rhine. Yeah, it's a pretty good anti-tank plane. You get lots of them. It reloads fast. It's kind of cheap. Also has some AA missiles. Yeah, I think the Peace Rhine is kind of has an, everyone knows the Peace Rhine. It's just pretty good, pretty alright. Now No. No. ECR is your only seed plane. Too expensive for 1 versus 1, obviously. But for team games, it's pretty alright. Not much to say here, really. Ideas we talked about. So yeah. Yeah, when it comes to the bread and butter units, support and tank, and in a way infantry as well, it's just you have a lot of specialized units in a way. Your tanks not being auto-loaded means that you can't really supplement expensive tanks by spamming 2A1s or something. Also due to AP and armor distribution, you know, something like you could. I've said it before, the M84A, or to an extent also the M1 Wilk, you kind of can go for super heavy, have a huge gap, then M84A. And you'll be perfectly fine because the M84A is so good. But the 2A4, the 2A1s, the 2A4NL, the Leopard 2, they're just so... They're okay for the price gap, but they are bad when it comes to fighting tanks that are just 1 or 2 steps above them, you know? So they're very... Yeah, very niche. And, yeah. So you will have to do quite a lot of combined arms with this deck. Of course, you can also just go for the Grenadier spam and spam like maybe Leopard 2s. You know, I guess it works with a lot of smoke. But yeah. When it comes to like having a quote-unquote normal or average default playstyle, whatever you want to call it, you have to mix a lot of units. Especially when it comes to like tanks. But then for 1 versus 1, the AA is gonna be awkward and stuff, so it is also kind of slow. Not as bad as Commonwealth, but yeah. But yeah, that's Dutch German. Good deck. Having 4 super heavies in team games, obviously very strong, and then the 2A4 and L instead of just the 2A4 next. Yeah, it is the weaknesses that it has in 1 versus 1 aren't as big of a deal in team games, not nearly. But that goes for many decks, I think. Not all of them, but many. So yeah, I guess you could, in a way, it is a bit like Soviets in 1 versus 1. No, it's not. It is only a bit like Soviets in the sense that it is significantly better in team games. But other than that, it's actually not a whole lot like like Soviets. What am I talking about? Yeah. Hope you still enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you next time.